Joe Dante, great to see you again. You were a guest on the TCM cruise.
Had a great time.
You've been directing films since the late 1970s, mid-1970s,
Yeah.
right? Among them, Howling, Piranha, Inner Space, Gremlins, Gremlins 2. And Joe has this enthusiasm for film history. Where did that love of film begin?
I was a Saturday matinee kid. I went to the Saturday matinee in Livingston, New Jersey, where I could walk to the theater, and I became enamored of the 10 cartoons and the 2 features. And
10 cartoons?
10 cartoons. There were always 10 cartoons to get the kids in, and then they would run the 2 features, which, if it was an adult movie playing, they would book a Tarzan movie or a science fiction movie or something, and that would be for the kids. But if it was something that they thought was appropriate for kids, then they would run that too. And they would change on Wednesday, Sunday, and so Saturday and Sunday were different bills, and so I would go on Sunday too, instead of church. But for me, it was sort of like going to church, because when the lights go down and you what am I going to see? How am I going to be transported? I don't think I thought that consciously as a kid, but later it dawned on me that this was really kind of my religion.
So, Joe, you've picked 2 movies. The first one is Night of the Hunter from 1955, the sole film directed by Charles Laughton, Robert Mitchum leading the cast. So pretend this is an NBA game and give people who don't know a 24-second or less setup for what this is, what the movie is.
It's based on a novel by Davis Grubb. It's a very dark movie about a fake preacher named Harry Powell, and he is in jail with Peter Graves, who has stolen some money and is going to be executed, and he manages to figure out a way to get the money. And of course, it involves his 2 children. And so Mitchum insinuates himself into
the lives of this family, with the widow.
Shelley Winters, his widow.
So a lot of film lovers like this movie. As a director, is there something that, as people watch it, they should look for that maybe they wouldn't otherwise see?
Well, Charles Laughton was a very unusual director in that he had not made a film before. And his technique was very different than most directors. He would leave the camera on all the time. And it's an unusual way of making a picture. But then again, it's a very unusual picture. And in fact, except for the other picture I chose tonight, The Fool Killer, I would have said there was no movie like Night of the Hunter. But The Fool Killer is actually kind of like Night of the Hunter.
It is. Do you know any other directors who generally do that? I mean, especially, easier now, right? Because you're not wasting film, but
no, now
filming
was a very cumbersome process, because you had to reload and you had to do all the attendant stuff to work with film. But now with video, it would be very simple to just keep the video on all the time, and I think a lot of people do that. But in 1955, it was extremely unusual. And the crew, consisting of some terrific people, was totally behind it. They loved him, and they thought that he was a genius, and that they were making a great film.
Yeah, so Stanley Cortez, who shot the movie, the DP, and I'll paraphrase the quote, but basically said, I learned more about cinema from Charles Laughton than anybody else except maybe Orson Welles.
And Cortez has his own particular style, which is the same whether he's working on a big budget movie or some of the really lower budget pictures he did later, which involves shadow and light and taking light off of things. And also the production design of the movie is extremely theatrical. It's not a realistic looking movie except when it goes outdoors, and then it's almost like you're watching a different movie. It's really stylized, and what's interesting for me was that I saw Night of the Hunter at a Saturday matinee when I was 9 years old.
Oh my God.
And
what time did this start, by the way? I'm just curious whether it was in the morning.
No, is it 1 o'clock in the afternoon is when they would run the pictures after the cartoons. 10 cartoons and Night of the Hunter.
10 cartoons to get you in the mood for Night of the Hunter.
There is a slightly cartoonish quality to some of the movie, and particularly Mitchum's performance. But all I can say is that for an audience of 9-year-olds or 10-year-olds or whoever our kids were, I've never seen them so rapt. And they were so terrified by this picture. People just remember it their whole lives.
All right, let's watch the movie, because there's much to discuss afterwards. Joe Dante, thanks very much. Here it is from 1955, directed by Charles Laughton, his only film as a director. Here are Robert Mitchum, Shelley Winters in Night of the Hunter. Back with director Joe Dante. Joe also created the website Trailers from Hell, which is a great resource for classic movie lovers, and also co-hosts the podcast The Movies That Made Me.
It's true, I do.
Okay, so what are we to make of the fact that Charles Laughton, great actor, Oscar winner for The Private Life of Henry VIII from 1933, never made another film? This experience turned him off.
This picture, which he had such hopes for, was not just a flop. It was a disastrous flop. It got terrible reviews. It made no money, and it crushed him. He had been planning on doing The Naked and the Dead next.
Oh, yeah.
And he was so disillusioned that nobody could see the merit in his work that he just said, okay, this is not something I'm going to do again, which I think is a loss for all of us. Once again, if you go back into the annals of criticism, there's a lot of situations where directors got so depressed by the bad reviews of the movies. Like David Lean didn't work for a couple of years after the bad reviews for Ryan's Daughter. And particularly a film as daring and unusual as Night of the Hunter, which I can understand that in 1955 it must have seemed rather bizarre, but it's obviously a work of art. And the fact that its creator was kept from giving us anything else, I think is really tragic.
Do you read reviews? Did you in the beginning?
I try not to, because there was a review of The Burbs where Vincent Canby said that this movie is as empty as a movie can be without actually creating a vacuum.
It's a nice line.
Well, it is a nice line, and it struck me, because I used to be a critic too, and it struck me about how sometimes they just love the idea of being able to craft a great put-down as opposed to actually talking about the movie. And in this case, people just did not understand the movie. They didn't understand why he made it. They didn't understand that it was supposed to be scary and funny. They were offended that kids were in it. It was the wrong movie at the wrong time. It was a real bad break for him.
The Burbs is good, by the way. I mean,
it's not. It's no Night of the Hunter.
No, it's no. Oh, yeah, okay. It's not, but there's a lot of room between a vacuum and Night of the Hunter for good movies, you know. So the use of shadow and light and the way the silhouette of Mitchum is seen throughout the movie, whether he's standing still or riding a horse or sitting out on the stoop in the front yard, is that purely collaborative, or is it a DP like Stanley Cortez saying, "I got an idea," and Lawton going along with it, or Lawton telling him, I want this? Well,
Lawton did a great deal of study of silent movies before he made this picture. And he sort of treated the movie as a silent movie. And the fact that Lillian Gish is in it obviously creates a connection there, although Lawton had actually asked Elsa Lanchester to play the part. Who was his wife. Yeah. And she said, no, you should get Lillian Gish, because you're watching all these silent movies.
We got to talk about Lillian Gish just for a sec, because she's so great in it. You don't know what to make of her at first, and then she just turns out to be so wonderfully caring. That is a real maternal figure that shows up in this movie and sort of saves, I suspect, kids, 9-year-olds watching this movie who were, desperate for something good to happen.
It helped us get through that Saturday matinee, that's for sure. She's wonderful in the movie and gives it a lot of heart. And also, which is helped also by the Walter Schumann's musical score, which is really moving. And there's some rather odd but beautiful songs in it. And it's a movie that I get choked up every time I watch it. I mean, it's a very emotional movie, especially for a picture that's so sort of off-putting in a lot of ways.
And in what amounts to a small part, but critically important, Shelley Winters also really delivers.
She does.
She's aching.
She's quivering with cleanness.
That's right. That's right. She's quivering with cleanness, yeah. And then that's a little cartoonish, too. I mean, just the manner in which she is killed is a little cartoonish.
Well, that's also one of the most stagey scenes.
Yeah, it's very stagey.
Which is the Valse Trieste thing with the set that looks like a church and the deliberate movements in slow motion that were apparently choreographed to the music. There's just so much goodness in this movie that it's hard to imagine that people didn't see it.
Well, plenty of people see it now. It is sort of universally loved. And I will tell you that Joe Dante would not have picked this movie unless we could have secured the rights to the film that we're showing next.
This is
right?
true.
A movie that is clearly inspired by The Night of the Hunter. Stick around. Joe and I will return with The Fool Killer, starring Anthony Perkins, next on TCM. I'm back with film director Joe Dante. Joe, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Joe has programmed tonight's double feature. We just saw The Night of the Hunter from 1955. The film that you have next, The Fool Killer from 1965, when this was relayed to me, I thought it was a precursor to The Night of the Hunter. But this is a movie that was clearly 10 years later massively influenced by The Night of the Hunter. Most people watching on TCM, this is one I'm certain of, have neither seen nor heard of The Fool Killer. What is the Fool Killer? It's
one of those movies that I sort of get behind because I found it as a film programmer at the Philadelphia College of Art, and I had a 16mm print of it. This was a movie that was made by Eli Landau, who was a very high-class producer who did the American Film Theater and a lot of classy movies. And this was one of a series of films that he made in the early 60s. This was shot in Knoxville, Tennessee in 1963. It stars Anthony Perkins and Edward Albert, Eddie Albert's son, who went on to have quite a career, but he's 12 years old in this movie.
He's a terrific child
And
actor.
he's really
good.
great. It's the first thing he ever did. And a lot of terrific actors like Henry Hull and Salome Jens and a guy named Arnold Moss, who plays this reverend who is terrifying. And it's just one of those movies that fell through the cracks. I once encountered Eli Landau at a function of some sort, and I went up to him and I asked him about The Fool Killer, and he said, "Oh, The Fool Killer." Oh, which led me to believe that there had been some source involved in the making of the movie, and certainly in the distribution of the movie. It never came out anywhere that I could find except a screening in Knoxville in 1965, which was several years after it was actually
Where
shot.
it was shot, as
Yeah.
you said. Yeah. So, and who directed it?
Servando Gonzalez, who is a Mexican director who had made a film called Yanko, which was a prize winner and a sort of a magical realism movie about a child. A lovely movie, but it played art houses. Unlike The Fool Killer, which didn't play anywhere.
And Gonzalez was a successful director in Mexico.
He was, and he was still a successful director after he made this film. But any chances of him becoming a known quantity in America were fairly dashed by the fact that nobody ever saw this picture. It was released through Allied Artists. They didn't get very many bookings. Somehow it migrated to American International. They were going to change the title to A Violent Journey, but then they didn't release it either, so they sent it right to television. And that's where I found this print that I ran at the Philadelphia College of Art and announced as the Philadelphia premiere of this new movie.
That's awesome.
And I fell in love with this movie because it's so unusual. First of all, its roots are obviously in Night of the Hunter. It shares many similarities, including shots of trains coming at you with ominous music.
And shadows.
And some of the most exhilarating camera work that I had seen. There's a lot of really interesting things that Servando Gonzalez does with this movie that are just unexpected. It's a dark story. Anthony Perkins plays what probably people thought, oh, he's just doing his psycho character again, but he's not. It's more like he's playing the character that he played in Friendly Persuasion, who was a very reluctant warrior in the Civil War, and now obviously has PTSD.
Yeah, even the character he plays in Fear Strikes Out, where he plays Jimmy Pearsall, a baseball player who we now know was bipolar, but was then like the first professional athlete known to have any sort of mental issues, right? That was how it was seen. This was something Anthony Perkins was really good at.
Well, I met him once, and he was a lovely guy. And I talked about this movie, which he almost had no memory of because...
Is that right? No.
Well, because, you know, once you make a movie and nobody sees it, and nobody talks about it, and nobody writes about it, it's sort of like it didn't happen.
Yeah, and then you move on. He's done, you know, he's done so many things.
Had a great career.
Yeah.
But my goal in bringing this film to TCM is that I want to get people to see it. I feel like it's my mission to get people interested in movies that may have escaped their notice, and this is certainly one. I've been trying to do it for Trailers from Hell for years, and I never find a trailer. Hopefully this will galvanize it a little bit, because I think people will find that this is a pretty interesting movie that has escaped their notice.
All right, Joe, let's watch the movie. Much more to discuss afterwards. Thanks. Here's the film from 1965, a picture clearly influenced by the movie Joe picked first tonight, The Night of the Hunter. This is Anthony Perkins and Edward Albert in The Fool Killer. Back with director Joe Dante, who programmed tonight's 2-for-1 double feature. We started with The Night of the Hunter from 1955, Charles Laughton's only movie, Robert Mitchum. And this film from 10 years later, clearly influenced by The Night of the Hunter, which is why Joe programmed it. So, The Fool Killer. So let's talk about the ending here to The Fool Killer, Joe, because you had a reaction to it that I think only a film director has.
Well, there are a lot of odd shots in this movie, and a lot of shots where the director said to the DP, Alex Phillips Jr., who's a great Mexican DP, can we do this? How if we do this thing? You know, and at the end of this movie, Gonzalez decided that he wanted to go underneath the railroad tracks and come back out on the other side as the train goes away to see the kid disappear into the background. And the effort it must have taken I can hear the crew grumbling now, how difficult it must have been to dig this hole, push the camera through it, and lift it up. I mean, these are heavy cameras. This is 1963, you know.
Oh, when they
shot it,
yeah. They shot it, yeah.
And it's kind of breathtaking. I mean, there's a lot of shots in the movie that just sort of, I was just bowled over by them. And I was in film school, you know, and I was thinking, this is a really interesting movie. And that's why I was particularly disappointed that nobody but me ever saw it.
This did not have much of a budget. It barely got any release. That's an expensive shot you're talking about, right?
Yeah, but I think when you're making a movie, you want it to be as good as possible. And if you have good people with you, even though they grumble about having to dig a hole, they know it's for the good of the movie. And it is a terrific ending for a movie.
You brought up the cast right away in the beginning. This is a quality cast even beyond Anthony Perkins and this really enormously talented child actor, Edward Albert, who went on to have a nice career in films and television.
Yeah, I think most of the cast is New York actors. Henry Hull, of course, had a great career and is a very colorful actor. And
he was Dirty Jim.
At his best in this movie. And Salome Jens, Angel Baby herself, who is always, I thought, a very magical presence as an actress, didn't do that much. And Arnold Moss, he is this reverend who gives this impassioned speech, which is a hellfire speech. It galvanizes the kid, and it's fairly terrifying.
And then don't you wonder, ain't they the evil one a coming for you?
You saw this movie, you were older. You were in film school at the time?
Yeah, I was in college.
But you would go, as we learned from The Night of the Hunter, at 9, you saw Night of the Hunter at 9 years old. You'd go to the theater, you'd see it at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on a Saturday, right?
Yeah.
Is this every week? I mean, close to 52 weeks a year as you could make it.
I would go as often as I could. The double bill I would have done if I hadn't done these was the one that my parents called the police on because I stayed to see them twice.
Hold on, what?
World Without End and Abbott and Costello Meet the Mummy. They were so good on a Sunday that I said, I got to see them again. So I stayed and saw them again. And when I came back, I came home, my parents had called the police because they didn't know where I was. And so it was suggested that I do those two pictures. And I said, well, but I'd like to do the Fool Killer, so let me do that.
I'm more pleased that you did that. But that is a great story. So you were so into these two movies.
I was transcended. Well, World Without End is a time travel movie. And I always liked that. And I loved Abbott and Costello. This was their last Universal picture. And it was just so much fun that it's like if I had to go back and relive a day at the movies, that's the day I would pick.
So you went, and it just didn't matter really what was showing. Like you were gonna.
No, that's not true. I didn't see grown-up movies. I didn't see Executive Suite,
right.
things like that. Because
I like Executive Suite.
I would like it now, but when I was 9, it was like I was spending time looking for quarters on the floor so I could get candy. So I mean, there were certain movies that just didn't appeal to me, but they were very canny about the way they they programmed these Saturday matinees, except for the Night of the Hunter Day, because I saw a lot of great pictures. I saw Invaders from Mars. I saw This Island Earth. I saw all these great movies that were, 50s movies when I was a kid, and they were new.
Joe, thanks very much. This was great. Thanks for programming these films, especially The Fool Killer, which I'm sure was a treat for so many people. Appreciate it. Joe's work is done for the night, but the movies, of course, continue on TCM as they always do, uncut and commercial-free. So stick around.